So now I'm going to demonstrate my Obsidian workflow. So you're probably wondering why that's all relevant. Let me talk about it a little bit real quick. So Obsidian is basically a note-taking software, more or less, and you can do a whole bunch of different cool things within Obsidian. So I've been using Notepad++ and the Notes app on my Mac to create a whole bunch of different notes and stuff, and it's very unorganized and jumbled up. But a system that I've been switching to recently is Obsidian. It's a way to keep track of notes, and I would almost even consider a revolutionary way because of all the functionality it can give you. So why don't I just show you? It'll be easier to show you than to just talk about it. So this is how I have some of my notes nowadays. I have what you see right here, which is called the Kanban board, and I'll kind of show you how to get this up and running if I can. We'll see. So Obsidian basically just deals with a bunch of different markdown files. But what I have right here is a Kanban board, and it's a plugin. So now let's talk about the Kanban board itself. So basically, I'll just demonstrate mine, and then I'll show how to create a vault afterwards. So this is useful particularly for to-do lists. And this is my form of to-do list, my ideal form of it. So I have columns called today, tomorrow, which makes perfect sense because this would be today's to-do list. And then I can prepare tomorrow's ahead of time, and it eventually moves into today, right? And then short term will eventually make it into tomorrow and today. So anything I want to do soon will go on the short term list. Anything that I want to do someday, but it could be 3 months, 9 months, 18 months from now, whatever. If I don't know exactly when I'm going to be doing it, but I eventually want to do it someday, it goes in long term. And it'll eventually make it into short term. I'm going to do it soon. Right? So this is really cool because when you're trying to figure out the stuff you need to do, that can be kind of tricky. It can also be tricky to keep track of everything you want to eventually do someday. So this format is quite useful for that. So Kanban, in case you didn't know, I think Scrum uses that in software development stuff. They might use Kanban boards with agile development, if I remember correctly, and it's in this same format. So normally it goes from left to right. So like things you need to do all go in here, then eventually all the different stages that happen are all the different columns that you see. But I have it the opposite way around, and this makes sense for my workflow specifically. So obviously the idea is, yeah, anything I want to do soon goes here. Something I eventually want to do someday goes here. It'll eventually make it into here. And then someday when I actually end up doing it, it'll go to tomorrow and today. So for example, let's choose some examples right here. Stuff I'm going to be doing soon. So for example, if I realize I'm actually going to be setting up the Linux server tomorrow once I get my server all revamped with my boot drive. I actually haven't mentioned this yet. I will soon, but this boot drive right here was the old boot drive of this computer. I cloned this onto a newer drive like this, and this boot drive is only 256 gig compared to the 1 terabyte drive. And this is going to be the boot drive of a server, rack mount server. And once I get that all revamped and stuff, then I'll be setting it up with various stuff. So like I might do this. I might set up a caching server. I might set up a lamp stack, for example. So that might go into short term and then eventually it'll make it into tomorrow. And then let's say that day comes, then I just simply go like this. I'm like, okay, so today these are the things that need to be done, right? Then obviously when I'm done with an item, I can just check it off as I complete items in a given day. That's not really done yet. This is done because I'm doing the video now, right? I can check off items and then it either makes it into completed. The main purpose of that completed list right there is a lot of stuff I do I'm probably eventually going to be talking about someday, whether it's on a voice recording or just a video in general, especially if there was a tedious process involved with it. That goes into completed because I may eventually talk about it someday in that form, or I might not at all. Who knows? If I don't, then I usually archive it, which you can find at the end of the markdown file. If you go into the markdown view, which I have mapped as Control E, you can map keyboard shortcuts by going to hotkeys, by the way. And in this case, toggle between Kanban and markdown mode as part of the Kanban plugin. I can map Control E, for example, to switch between the two views, which I find quite handy. But anyway, I could go to the end of the file, and those are all the archived items. So things that I'm probably not going to end up talking about at any point will go into there, and things that I will eventually talk about go into the completed list instead. So this is quite useful for that. Things I don't even want to archive, I'll just completely delete it altogether. But usually I'll archive or put it in the completed, that way I can reference it at any time. But yeah, this is amazing. Compared to my old to-do list on Notepad++, I mean, come on. What was I doing back then? Ridiculous. This is so much better because short-term stuff could eventually make it into today. Obviously, this will be a while before it really happens, but you get the idea. I could check off items and then, yeah, what I just said. So this is now my to-do list. It's very handy. I know you could do stuff like this with Notion, but this is a nice free way to do it, and it's compatible with Windows, Mac, and Linux. I used to do some of this stuff in Atom as well, but it doesn't support macros very easily. This supports macros across all platforms, so that's one of the main reasons why I switched to this system. But why don't I show how I got some of this set up? I don't know what just happened there, but... And if I'm moving a bunch of items at once, by the way, I usually go into Markdown view and then copy and paste text, because I can highlight as much as I want at a given time, and that might be faster than dragging things one at a time in some situations. So that's what I use that for. And by the way, Vim is not required. I just use it because I know how to use it, and it's very powerful. So of course I'm going to use it. So any note that you create, you can specify where it goes to. If I was in Kanban mode, it would have automatically went into this folder right here, which has all of these hyperlinks right here. I just toss them in there because I'll access them like this. So there's that. So I can have new notes, which I can right click and create notes from a card as well. I don't know, and I'd add whatever I want to it. I could add hyperlinks and stuff within it too if I want, like that. Create more notes, but I'm not going to do that right now. But I can. So that's what that's used for. I usually have this on the default value. this checkbox option is what actually gives checkboxes next to everything. Then I can check off whatever I do. Is there any? So I got that checked off, for example. So yeah, I used to use a strike through, which is very inefficient compared to just doing the checkbox. So that's pretty useful. Let's see. Those are the main settings I have as far as the Kanban board goes. So let me show you how to create this now. So essentially, you'll create what's called a vault. When you first use Obsidian, this is what you'll do. Create a new vault. You name it whatever you want, like notes, for example. And then you just pick where you want it to save. I might create a new folder for it, although I think it'll create a folder all by itself, so that's probably not necessary. So now we have a brand new vault. This is what you'll be welcomed with right here. So where do you even begin when it comes to this? Well, you want to install plugins. Each vault has a separate set of plugins. So you go to Community Plugins, turn it on, go to Browse. For Kanban boards, you just put in Kanban right here, install, and then homepage is the other main one that I use. So I can create a default file to jump into. That's odd. Oh, that's probably because I don't have the latest version of Obsidian. But you can install homepage if you have the latest version and set a keyboard shortcut, which I unfortunately won't be able to show right now. But if you want to use Kanban, then you turn it on. But as far as the default settings go now, let's see here. Editing view is what I want. I like to personally show line numbers, but you might not want that. I cannot remember what my other settings were. If you want to use Vim, you can turn that on. And you have to show that you know how to quit Vim without saving. I almost don't want to show you that because if you're going to use it, you should know this. But okay. So let's see. To create a Kanban board, I think you can go to Command Palette. That's what you do. You open the Command Palette, which anything you do with a keyboard shortcut should be in this Command Palette. So if you don't want to use a keyboard shortcut, you can do a whole bunch of stuff here. So if you want to create a Kanban board, you just go like this. And then you can create all your columns like today, tomorrow, short term, long term, etc. Complete. And maybe any other relevant columns. Then I hit cancel once I've got everything inserted. And this is the append mode. So if I add number 1, if I add an item like that, you can see it adds the most recent item to the bottom. But if I want to add to the top, I just click on go to board settings, change this to prepend, and it'll add that to the top instead of the bottom, which is useful for long lists. Then you can just go ahead and create your list. If you already have lists in other software, then I highly recommend add everything one at a time like this. That might be faster, to be honest. Or you could just switch into Markdown view, which I can't do with my current shortcut mapping. I'll go to that palette down here, hotkeys, and then search Markdown. And then to toggle between the modes, I'm gonna delete this because I don't want to use it for that. I want to map that to Control E, so I just click this and press Control E. So now I can press Control E and it'll take me right to there. So if you have a list on a text file or something, you can paste that all in here. But then you will have to possibly convert it to this format right here. Although it might not be necessary, because Kanban, it didn't automatically create them. Between everything you add, you will have to add this to the beginning of every single line, which you could probably automate in some way, or you could just go through the manual task. Once you got that, then everything will appear where it should. Figure out the way you would do that. And once you do that, then you adapt it to this new system, hopefully. So if you want checkboxes, then toggle that setting right there. Like I have 270 for this setting. And then I can create a new note from a card if I want to elaborate on something. And then of course I can create a paradox where I do it even further. Don't do that. Instead, I would recommend highlighting what you want to hyperlink and then hitting the left bracket twice, and it'll automatically highlight and do the right brackets for that. I just learned that the other day, so I would highly recommend doing things that way instead. So that's pretty useful for organizing ideas, like to-do lists or whatever. If I'm doing journaling stuff, I will have a Kanban board for that as well. I can create relevant columns for that. Journal entries will go into their own markdown file, for example. Then any other relevant thing will be added to their own columns. Then you can drag everything around like this as needed. So stuff from short term will probably eventually make it into tomorrow, which will then make it into today to eventually get checked off. The other thing I forgot to mention with the previous one is if I have like a really large project, for example, I might either drag that into today and check it off when I'm done what I'm going to for that day, and eventually uncheck it and bring it back to here if I'm going to work on it again eventually. Or else I can create one large thing and create a bunch of smaller things. So for example, this is something that pertains to that particular item. And then I can just break down larger things into smaller things, which is so useful for constructing to-do lists, as you can see here. So yeah, so then with the home page, you just go to the settings for that. You can configure the home page, which would be your Kanban board. So this is called Untitled Kanban. That's what my Kanban board is. I might consider renaming that to to-do lists, for example. And if I have the homepage plugin installed, which I do on here, then I can go to that and set the homepage to that to-do. I'm on the other list because that's where I have the homepage plugin installed. So yeah, that's pretty much it. Honestly, that's pretty much everything I wanted to show regarding that. So that's how I use Obsidian right now. I use it for journaling stuff too, and I have a macro for that. But I just wanted to show my general Obsidian workflow and hopefully inspire you to do something similar, because this is really powerful for creating to-do lists and stuff. It's so hard to keep track of everything, I think. And I've always been copying and pasting stuff in text files, and that's really tedious. So I like using this system because I can use it between multiple systems. It's quite useful for that. If you have any questions pertaining to any of this, feel free to let me know in the comments and I'll try my best to get to you as soon as I can. So that's my Obsidian workflow in a nutshell.